Welcome to Golden Bachelor. If you love celebrity news and real entertainment updates, you're in the right place. Mel Owens surprised fans when he quietly returned to Detroit for a deeply personal reason. Instead of cameras and red carpets, the Golden Bachelor star focused on the city that helped shape his early years. Those close to him say this visit wasn't about publicity, it was about gratitude, reflection, and giving back when it mattered most. During his time in Detroit, Mel took part in a meaningful community effort that touched many lives. He spent hours listening to local stories, meeting families, and supporting a cause connected to resilience and hope. Witnesses described the moment as emotional, noting that Mel appeared moved by the strength of the people around him. Fans later learned that this gesture came from a place of quiet pain and growth. Mel has spoken before about how life's unexpected turns can change a person, and this act seemed to reflect that lesson. Rather than speaking publicly, he let his actions carry the message, one of compassion, humility, and connection. The response was immediate. Viewers praised Mel for showing that kindness doesn't need grand speeches to make an impact. For many, this moment redefined how they see him, not just as a reality TV star, but as someone using his platform to bring light during difficult times. As the days passed, more details slowly emerged about Mel Owens' time in Detroit. Those who crossed paths with him noticed how intentionally low-key he kept everything. There were no announcements, no press statements, just quiet moments spent with people who rarely get the spotlight. It was clear this trip meant something deeply personal to him. Sources say Mel revisited familiar neighborhoods from his past, places filled with memories of struggle, growth, and perseverance. Standing there again seemed to stir emotions he had kept private for years. Friends later shared that this return helped him reflect on how far he's come and how important it is to honor where the journey began. What moved fans most was learning that Mel's actions weren't about fixing everything overnight. Instead, he focused on presence, showing up, listening, and offering support in ways that felt genuine. Many described his demeanor as thoughtful and heavy with emotion, as if each conversation carried meaning beyond words. Online, reactions poured in once the story surfaced. Viewers said this moment revealed a quieter, more vulnerable side of Mel Owens. Some admitted they hadn't expected such depth from a reality TV figure, while others said this was the most powerful thing he's ever done because it came without seeking attention. For Mel, Detroit wasn't just a city, it was a reminder that life's hardest chapters often shape the most meaningful choices. And while he may not have said much publicly, fans believe this experience changed him in ways that will stay long after the cameras move on. What truly stood out to those around Mel Owens was how deeply the experience seemed to affect him. At one quiet moment during his visit, he paused, visibly emotional, as if overwhelmed by memories he hadn't revisited in years. People nearby said it wasn't sadness alone, it was a mix of gratitude, loss, and understanding that time changes everything. Mel reportedly spent part of his visit supporting a local initiative focused on rebuilding and renewal. Rather than stepping into a leadership role, he chose to stand alongside volunteers, working quietly and offering encouragement. That humility left a strong impression, especially on those who recognized him but respected his wish to keep the moment simple. Later, fans began connecting the dots. In recent months, Mel had hinted that life after the Golden Bachelor hadn't been easy. Fame brought attention, but it also brought reflection. This return to Detroit felt like a reset, a way to ground himself after an emotionally intense chapter of his life. Many viewers said this moment reshaped how they understood Mel's journey. Instead of a dramatic on-screen storyline, this real-life act felt more powerful. It showed that growth doesn't always happen under bright lights. Sometimes it happens quietly, in familiar places, surrounded by people who understand where you came from. As word continued to spread, fans shared messages of support, calling his actions real, human, and deeply moving. For them, this wasn't just another headline, it was a reminder that compassion and sincerity still matter, especially when no one is watching. And for Mel Owens, Detroit wasn't just part of his past, it became a turning point, marking the start of a more grounded, purposeful chapter that many believe will define who he becomes next. As Mel Owens prepared to leave Detroit, those close to him noticed a quiet change in his demeanor. He seemed lighter in some ways, yet more reflective than before. The visit hadn't erased the weight he carried, but it appeared to give that weight meaning. Sometimes facing the past doesn't bring closure, it brings clarity. Before departing, Mel took one last walk through a familiar area, standing silently as if saying goodbye to a chapter only he fully understood. Witnesses said he took his time, looking around with emotion in his eyes, clearly aware that moments like these don't come often. It wasn't about nostalgia, it was about acceptance. Later, fans picked up on subtle signs through his actions rather than words. A simple message, a quiet gesture of support, and continued involvement from a distance showed that Detroit wasn't just a one-time visit for Mel. The connection remained, even after he left. Many viewers said this story resonated because it felt real. There was no dramatic announcement, no bold headline from Mel himself. Instead, the impact came from consistency, proof that meaningful change often happens slowly and without applause. For fans of The Golden Bachelor, this moment stood out as something deeper than television. It revealed a man shaped by life, loss, and lessons learned the hard way. And while Mel Owens may move forward into new opportunities, Detroit will always be part of his story, quietly influencing the choices he makes next. What began as a tearful moment turned into something lasting, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful actions are the ones done in silence, guided by heart rather than attention. In the weeks that followed, the impact of Mel Owens' quiet return to Detroit continued to ripple outward. People who had met him during those days spoke about how genuine the experience felt. There were no rehearsed moments, no sense of performance, just a man reconnecting with something he had carried inside for a long time. Mel reportedly stayed in touch with several people he met, checking in and offering support long after he had left the city. To those involved, this mattered more than any public gesture. It showed that his actions weren't temporary or symbolic, they were personal. Detroit wasn't just part of a story he visited, it became part of a promise he intended to keep.
Fans began reflecting on how this moment contrasted with the version of Mel they first saw on television. The polished image gave way to something quieter and more complex. Many said this chapter revealed a man learning how to live with the weight of his experiences, choosing empathy over attention. There was also a sense that Mel himself had changed. Those close to him noticed he spoke differently afterward, more thoughtfully, more slowly, as if he was choosing his words with care. It was clear that this journey wasn't about fixing the past, but about honoring it. For viewers, this story struck a nerve. In a world filled with noise, Mel Owens' silent act stood out. It reminded people that sometimes the most meaningful turning points happen away from cameras, shaped by memory, reflection, and a simple desire to give back. And while Mel never publicly explained everything behind his emotional visit, fans believe that was intentional. Some stories aren't meant to be fully told, only felt. Detroit became one of those stories, written quietly into the next chapter of his life. As time moved on, Mel Owens never tried to turn the Detroit moment into a headline of his own. Instead, he allowed others to speak quietly about what they witnessed. That silence seemed intentional, as if he understood that some experiences lose their meaning when explained too loudly. Those close to Mel say the visit reshaped how he viewed the future. He became more selective about where he showed up and why. Opportunities still came, but his priorities felt different. Detroit had reminded him that purpose doesn't always come from success. It comes from service, memory, and honesty with oneself. Fans began noticing subtle shifts. His public appearances felt calmer, more grounded. There was less urgency, less need to prove anything. Many interpreted this as the result of someone who had finally faced something unresolved and made peace with it, even if that peace came with lingering sadness. What resonated most was how relatable the moment felt. People shared their own stories online about returning to places tied to old emotions, about giving back when words felt inadequate, about finding meaning not in moving on, but in looking back with understanding. In the end, Mel Owens' emotional act for Detroit didn't change the world overnight, but it changed something quieter and deeper. It changed how people saw him, and perhaps how he saw himself. Sometimes the most powerful turning points don't arrive with applause. They arrive softly, leave a tear behind, and stay with you long after the moment has passed. And for Mel Owens, Detroit became exactly that kind of moment, one that continues to shape his journey, even in silence. Long after the headlines faded, the Detroit visit remained present in Mel Owens' daily life. Friends noticed that certain places, conversations, and even small moments now carried deeper meaning for him. It was as if returning to Detroit had reopened emotions he once set aside, but this time he didn't run from them. Mel reportedly began supporting similar community efforts elsewhere, inspired by what he experienced in the city. He didn't attach his name loudly or seek recognition. Instead, he chose consistency over visibility, believing that real change happens when attention moves away from the individual and toward the people who need it most. Fans continued to interpret this chapter as a turning point. Many said it felt like Mel was no longer chasing a story, but becoming one. A story shaped by experience, quiet loss, and the realization that giving back can sometimes heal parts of ourselves we didn't know were still hurting. There was also a sense of unfinished emotion, not regret, just acceptance that some feelings never fully disappear, and maybe they're not meant to. Maybe they exist to guide us, reminding us where we come from and why compassion matters. For Mel Owens, Detroit became more than a memory. It became a compass, one that pointed him toward a slower, more intentional path forward, one defined not by applause, but by meaning. And as fans continue to watch his journey unfold, many believe this chapter will always stand apart, not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it was real, quiet, and deeply human. With each passing month, Mel Owens seemed to carry Detroit with him in quiet ways. It showed in how he paused before speaking, how he listened more than he talked, and how he approached moments that once might have felt routine. That visit had slowed him down, not out of weakness, but awareness. People close to Mel said he became more comfortable with silence after that. Silence in conversations, silence in decisions. It was as if he had learned that not every feeling needs to be explained to be understood. Detroit taught him that some emotions are meant to be lived with, not resolved. Fans continued to reflect on why this story stayed with them so deeply. Perhaps it was because Mel didn't try to turn pain into inspiration overnight. He allowed it to exist honestly, messy, unresolved, and human. In doing so, he gave others permission to feel their own emotions without rushing past them. There were moments when Mel hinted, carefully, that life had taken unexpected turns. Nothing dramatic, just a sense that certain chapters end quietly, without clear answers. And sometimes, returning to where it all began is the only way to understand how those chapters shaped
Detroit
who you are
wasn't
now.
a solution. It wasn't closure. It was acknowledgement. And that may have been the most powerful part of all. As Mel continues forward, fans believe this experience will always sit beneath the surface of everything he does, not as a burden, but as a reminder of humility, of connection, and of the kind of strength that doesn't need to be seen to be real. Some stories don't end, they simply stay with us. And for Mel Owens, this one still does. Even as new opportunities appeared in Mel Owens' life, there was a noticeable shift in how he approached them. He no longer rushed toward what came next. Instead, he seemed to weigh each step carefully, as if the time spent in Detroit had taught him the value of moving with intention rather than impulse. Those who know him say Mel began setting quieter boundaries, protecting his time, choosing moments that felt meaningful, and stepping away from things that no longer aligned with who he was becoming. Detroit had reminded him that growth doesn't always look like progress to the outside world. Sometimes it looks like stillness. Fans continued to sense that something profound had settled into him. In small interviews and brief appearances, there was a softness in his tone, a depth that hadn't been there before. He didn't reference Detroit directly, but the influence was unmistakable. It lived in the pauses, the careful words, the emotion he no longer tried to hide. What made this chapter resonate so deeply was its honesty. There was no clear lesson wrapped neatly at the end, just a man learning to carry his past without letting it weigh him down, learning that sadness and purpose can exist side by side. Detroit became a quiet marker in Mel Owens' story, not the beginning, not the end, but a moment in between where reflection met acceptance. And perhaps that's why fans still talk about it, because it mirrors something many people understand, the need to return, to remember, and to move forward without forgetting. Some moments don't demand attention, they simply change you. And Mel Owens' moment in Detroit did exactly that, softly, permanently, and without asking to be seen. Over time, Mel Owens' connection to Detroit began to feel less like a single event and more like an ongoing influence. It shaped how he spoke about community, how he responded to people's struggles, and how he measured success in his own life. What once might have felt like pressure now felt like responsibility, one he carried quietly. People who worked alongside Mel noticed that he listened with more patience. He didn't rush to respond or offer solutions. He allowed space, understanding that sometimes being present is more powerful than trying to fix everything. Detroit had shown him that kind of strength firsthand. Fans, too, continued to find meaning in this chapter. Many said it stayed with them because it felt unfinished in the most honest way. Life rarely offers clean endings, and Mel didn't pretend otherwise. His story reflected that truth, growth without spectacle, emotion without explanation. There were moments when Mel acknowledged that some parts of the past remained tender, not painful in the way they once were, but still present. Instead of pushing those feelings away, he learned to carry them with care. That balance between holding on and letting go became central to who he was becoming. Detroit didn't give Mel Owens answers, it gave him perspective. And in that perspective, he found something steady, a way to move forward without losing touch with where he came from, a way to honor emotion without being defined by it. As fans continue to follow his journey, many believe this quiet chapter will always stand as one of the most meaningful, not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. Sometimes the most lasting changes happen slowly, in silence, and far from the spotlight. And for Mel Owens, Detroit will always be part of that quiet transformation. Thanks for watching Golden Bachelor. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next big story.